Hello, I am Dr. Francis Yu. These are my notes, summary, and commentary on Chelsea Turgeon's Residency Dropout, How I Quit My Medical Career to Travel the World and Work Remotely. And here's my super short summary. It is a lot about her story. She is a physician who throughout her education struggled with her uh, identity and worth. She ultimately resigned 1.5 years into her OBGYN residency. And her journey is this expansive outer and inner journey and about reconnecting to authentic self and encouragement for others to serve the world without being drained and exhausted. And her story about how she pursued non-clinical career opportunities and how she helps others with her coaching now. And the second part of the book is about some practical tips that will help people to discover themselves. So she talks about perspectives on life, risks, existential considerations, one of my favorite topics, about we live our own lives, just basically existential considerations, and the importance of getting help. So the logistics, this book was published on March 23rd, 2021. I picked it up the day it came out on Kindle. It's 84 pages and is right now on Kindle. And for me, it took me 3 hours approximately to read it from top to bottom while taking these notes. But I think I read pretty quickly, and I'm apparently pretty good at taking these notes and doing this stuff. So it might take you longer or shorter, but it took me 3 hours. So the table of contents, she has an introduction, part 1, her story, and part 2, the practical tips, and the conclusion. And throughout, I will highlight some quotes, which I just think that are great. Otherwise, it will be my paraphrasings. So the pages also might be a little bit off because I was reading this on Kindle and I feel like the pages switched around. I don't know. I'm not really a Kindle reader. Anyway, so it's okay to feel stuck, frustrated, and confused. This is likely a sign that you are growing and evolving in some way. Basically, growing pains, not just physical, but this psychic, spiritual, soul growing pains. Next quote, I believe there is a way for you to serve the world that doesn't leave you feeling so drained and exhausted. There is a way for you to get paid doing work you enjoy that isn't so all consuming. I'm all in. Authentic, serving yourself, serving others, and getting paid, doing your life work is what I call it. And she has 8 chapters in part 1. So starting from chapter 1, she really brings her authenticity and her story and her vulnerability, which really is pretty heavy but very inspirational. So chapter 1, the truth about hitting rock bottom. So she talks about her struggles during her intern year of her OBGYN residency, and she had a lot of things going on, but she spoke with her chief resident, and she ended up not quitting then, made some improvements, and ended the year quite well. And during her second year, she was able to. This is end of her intern year. She was able, and beginning of her second year, she became uninterested in the career pathways for OBGYN trained physicians. She consulted her chief resident again and somehow decided to hang in there. Then she started to experience emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, a decreased sense of accomplishment, and the existential crisis. And she started to not fulfill all her duties at work. And she had a talk with her program director. From the story I read, it seems like this was a very beautiful moment for her, and I'm actually very grateful the program director gave her this opportunity to take 5 weeks off. She took the offer. and she kind of experiences relief and shame at that moment. And in chapter 2, the best gift I ever received, really this break. So she said, taking a break will give you a level of clarity and perspective that is hard to access when you're in the trenches of your everyday life. And this comes up in her encouragement, her story, as well as her practical tips later about this moments to take a break. So she went to the park to journal, to create some intentions for my leave of absence, quote. Focus, quote, on answering one question, that I want to be a doctor or not, end quote. Described her conception of spirituality, about higher power and intuition. She goes into this a little bit in the book, but I'm sure I could talk about this for a while. But she does mention this to kind of put it into story and her context. And she made a list of rules for her leave of absence. She did daily meditation, journaling, writing from intuition and yoga, and plenty of time in nature and sleep. But she resisted the urge to come up with the master plan, as in figuring everything out. She actually mostly slept the first 2 weeks, and she went on the trip to Utah in the third week. And on their flight back, she wrote down her fears and then realized, this is a very key moment, that the fear, quote unquote, quote, the fear of wasting my time on this earth hit me so hard, end quote, and this was greater than her other fears. And she remarks about how she got her journaling, learning to write to intuition from Jess Lively. And it involves here writing a question, visualize getting the answer from the gut, like water from a well, she says. Quote, allowing the answer to come to me with patience, write it down verbatim, and doing a next question and having a conversation with intuition. In the fourth week of leave of absence, she had a dialogue. This dialogue with intuition and decided to leave residency. She just had a general direction where she wanted to go: travel, personal development, maybe blogging or coaching, but there was no definitive plan. Chapter 3, Power Through versus Peace Out. I think this is one of the most powerful quotes in the book. Ultimately, the reason I left medicine was because I came to the conclusion that I did not want to be a doctor. I realized being a doctor was not the right career path for me. Once I knew that, it was easy to make the decision to peace out instead of power through. Chapter 4, When the Going Gets Tough. This is the biggest thing from the chapter I took away, this quote. You can tap into your why, like an infinite well of motivation to help you power through, get back up, and keep going in the direction of your goals. But in medicine, when things got hard, I soon realized I didn't have a deep enough why. And she expands on this as she goes on in the book. So, the reason she went into medical school in the first place is because she was caught up in the shuffle of not really getting, I would say, the best direction, maybe internally or externally, in choosing her potential career. There was a lot of, more significant amount of considering social validation, living for others' approval, social conditioning, and basically this decision came from ego and not from our heart. And I can definitely relate in a way with this because I've also struggled with the social validation, living for others' approval, social conditioning, and I can say it's a big thing for a lot of physicians, partly because of the extensive education and training involved. And she ignored the signs and did not ask what she really wanted. She kind of went through the process. She continues to talk or write very eloquently and also poetically about her circumstance. And I quote it at length here just because it was just, I didn't want to not quote it. So I realized that going to medical school and working to become a doctor was exactly what I wanted at that time, but it's not what I wanted anymore. More importantly, it's not who I am anymore. When you don't have a deep enough why, you are like a tree without deep enough roots. You won't be able to withstand a storm. When your roots are shallow, you have nothing to anchor you when the wind picks up. You are just going to fall over. I didn't have a deep enough why to withstand the storm and the challenges of residency. There was nothing to hold me there or keep me going when things got tough. Realizing this was terrifying, but also liberating. She writes, when returning to your why, one of two things usually happens. You're reminded of the why, so you're motivated to keep on the path and continue, versus you face your uncomfortable truth. And she talks about the why times 5 exercise, and she mentions it again later in the book. And I also use a similar exercise for myself and others. I also have a 10,000 why version, but it for me it I actually came up with the idea from Lean Six Sigma. With my Lean Six Sigma training, it says root cause analysis. But anyway, so she gained this clarity, saw her original intentions, motivations, and saw that medicine might not be the path forward. Quote, it showed me that I could stick to my original desires and be flexible with how I brought them into fruition. Chapter 5, less med student, more person. So here she starts to write about her inner journey a lot, and especially how career success was a proxy for worthiness, her struggle with worth and value as a human being during residency, and that this pattern of achieving way into worthiness, quote unquote, started earlier in education. So, quote, it was a slow and painful journey of disentangling those two concepts and learning to reclaim my worthiness, but ultimately going through this process brought me one step closer to letting go of medicine once and for all. So as I say, this my commentary, all physicians, or most physicians, I can't say all, have a part of this somewhere, some point, because we go through school where it's about passing the test, getting the good grade, getting accepted into this school, med school, residency, into a job, passing these tests. And there's so much emphasis on this worthiness based on achieving something based on someone else set up. And this is, for anyone who's in a school for a long enough time, it's definitely a big component of that inner journey, inner work. And from an Enneagram perspective, I would say this is more painful and difficult for those who are type 3, because that really is the core complex constellation of the Enneagram type 3, about this value and worth feeling of, as opposed to knowing and understanding one's feeling of feeling value and worth and then doing things because of that, versus doing things then to feel and identify with a sense of value and worth out of accomplishments. So she talks about her cycle of achievements, and specifically she brings up specific examples about her studying, including her third year medical school, until she made this decision to do other things like join a kickball team, hip-hop dance, and casual hangouts versus studying every night. And she was really influenced, as she mentions again, Just Lively, the be, do, have model. And she got into her drive to learn about personal development and spiritual growth. And I'm going to quote here, I stopped believing that hard work, hustle, and achievements were the keys to success and happiness. I started to believe that I was already worthy, that I didn't have to do anything to prove myself or my worth. I could just accept the fact that I was good enough and worthy enough just because I am. This exactly the journey of the Enneagram Type 3 and the Type 3 in all of us that this is a beautiful experience to have. So, in short, she's disentangled her worth from her work. It helps that they both start with the first few letters and they kind of rhyme, right? Disentangle worth and work. Chapter 6, it'll all be worth it when. She talks about this delayed gratification, so I'm going to quote here. It's a way to delude yourself and justify your current misery with an empty promise of future happiness. You tell yourself that being unhappy now will lead to happiness in the future, but it's rarely true. So here, just going to comment here a little bit that indeed, experiments have shown that those who can delay their gratification tend to have greater emotional control, per se. There's a classic example of children who were able to delay the gratification of eating, I think it was a cookie, so they could get 2 cookies, and they tended to do well, quote unquote, in measurement in schools, etc. But we can argue is that measurement of success. And I'm, maybe what I'll do is I'll do a separate video about that because it's a good enough topic to talk about. Anyway, but there's a point where definitely you can't delay gratification forever, at least while on this earth. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and just go, I'm going to delay gratification some more. Well, there's some sort of balance. Maybe balance isn't the right word. There's a phase where those two things need to be in tune with your authenticity. So that's my commentary there. And look out for that video when I do that video on that study at some point. She had 2 teachings that helped shift from the end goal perspective to the whole journey perspective. Abraham Hicks, quote, "You cannot have a happy ending to an unhappy journey." And Tony Robbins, "The purpose of the goal is who you become to achieve it." And she didn't like who she was becoming. And she tells a story about how she ended up taking stimulant medication as well as another medication to help her with the panic attacks because she just was just so into this doing to her studies, so she could study longer and harder and avoid instead of addressing the root cause of the panic attacks, to medicate it away or suppress it. And this is another just great quote. I bolded it here because it's just so awesome. "Getting clear on my why, learning to accept my worthiness instead of hustling for it, focusing more on the process instead of the end result were instrumental shifts in my journey. As all of these pieces fell into place, they allowed me to come to the conclusion that I no longer wanted to be a doctor. They showed me with clarity and confidence that medicine was not the right career path for me." So she had this certainty about herself. Chapter 7, Why Korea? So she started off with some vague ideas. She was able to negotiate where she stayed. She announced her resignation, but was able to stay at the residency to keep working and getting paid. Then she figured that she hadn't exact what to do next, but she knew she wanted to be able to have the flexibility to make her income wherever she was. That she went through her travel blogger phase, and she resonated with Christine Addis at BeMyTravelMuse.com. She took Nomadic Math Superstar blogger course, but she realized it's a long game and she needed income in the meanwhile. So she went to her English teacher phase. She breezed so quickly and was able to decide to go to South Korea to do this whole English teaching thing. By the way, this whole English teaching thing in South Korea is no joke. As she says in her book, they arrange for your living situation, a lot of these things, and I have friends who've done this as well. And English is kind of like the power language in South Korea. Is all about this. You gotta learn, study, and to succeed. It's probably more harsh in South Korea and Japan than it is in the United States, but that's my commentary on that. And she continued maths course and decided against travel blogging. She engaged with a life coach training program. She got involved with self-help books. Janine Yoder, she took Janine's master class of this training program for coaching, and she connected a lot with this, and she saw med school as a detour to get here. So her plan at this point was to do the life coach certification course while teaching English in South Korea. And it's a beautiful quote. You don't have to know exactly how you will get from point A to point B. All you have to do is take messy action in the general direction of your point B, and the path will start to unfold for you one step at a time. Right? If someone told you exactly the way you could be happy, then you would know that from day one. But I would say I don't think I've met someone who's knew exactly every single step how to get from point A to point B, or even what their point B was. So this really speaks to that point. So, chapter 8, Life After Medicine. So, she very briefly mentions that she performed in a K-pop dance crew. And I think this explains why and how her dance posts on social media are so great. If you look at her, Instagram reels, she's just those dance moves are, wow. Anyway, so dealing with doubt. This quote, when you are breaking free of the conventional path prescribed by society, fear is going to be a constant companion. When you are walking down the road less traveled and forging your own way, you're going to have self-doubts because you are going against the grain. And I really, really, really like this point in this quote because what I say all the time is, you can only live your own life. You can't live someone else's life. We are all living our N=1 experiment, our own unique lives. But there is this fear because of this risk, which she talks about later. And she mentioned that someone at, I think it was an attending at a hospital, said to her, or she quote from the book, she looked at me and said, "You look like the person I always knew was in there," meaning she felt more lively and more vital and just being more herself. So she did have this transition period of shifting away from being doctor. And then she this quote here, "You are so much more than any one label you place on yourself or a role that you play." And I think this is very key for physicians. Physicians, because of their long training, but also this supposed prestige that comes with being a doctor, there's this, I think, more intense identification with that persona of being a doctor. I wrote actually a Kevin MD a guest post about this, how doctors over-identifying with your persona and your job or your role is actually damaging to your wholeness. And if also commentary-wise from a Chinese medicine extraordinary vessel perspective, the Dai, which is one of the 8 extraordinary vessels, is about how we navigate through the outer world, which is really our roles and how we show up in the world. Right, as a doctor, I'm a doctor, right? But more expansively, I'm a healer. More expansively than that, I'm a person who is there for others. And more expansively, I'm a member of humanity. And more expansively, a part of the cosmos and the universe. So here, this quote to me speaks to me how that label fits sometimes, but it's a part of who we are. We cannot completely identify with any label because we are just so much more than that. We are even so much more than our names in a way as well. She does speak to how her lifestyle was a bit unsettling. She has instability, uncertainty, a lot of moving, but she did have grounding routines to keep her, grounded. She on the flip side, also talks about her upsides since leaving her medical career. Better sleep, sleeping 8 hours almost every night, better mood, better relationships, more present in relationships, leaning into her emotions, spending more time in my happy places. She said enjoyable environments helps her well-being, using my creativity more, creativity, satisfaction, riches to life, flexibility, create my own schedule, more time, more fulfilling work. And who doesn't want these things, right? So that was the end of part 1 of her book. In part 2, she continues to practical tips. And she really emphasizes that we tell ourselves these limiting stories, which leads to unfulfilling lives, meaning we are responsible for a large chunk of our life and how we formulate it. Quote, these uncomfortable feelings are basically our soul trying to get our attention and shake us awake, to wake us up as to how magnificent we truly are. I really like this quote because it's what I like to do in my work as well. Awakening people, waking them up out of their zombie-like trance to their essence, to their person, to their potential, and to their authenticity and their soul, right? Talking about the soul is something I like to do as well in my work. So really like this quote because I feel like I connected with her as I read this quote, and I'll probably be using it in the future and quoting her. And she writes about, I say talks about, but it's a book, about perspective shifts from problems and perceiving them or situation not as problems but as opportunities and solutions. And really the purpose here in part 2 is to show the reader that they have a choice. And that staying in a career because you feel stuck is just tragic. So in chapter 9, she introduces the sunk cost fallacy and about reframing your sunk costs. So the sunk cost fallacy is a beautiful, elucidative, educational concept. I believe it comes from finances actually and behavioral economics, about how we cognitively bias and emotionally attach to something that we paid money or our attention to. For example, something we paid attention or money to, but instead of leaving the situation or moving on, we tend to hold ourselves back because of the personal ego identification we have with whatever was bought. So for example, let's say you pay for a movie in the movie theater, and 30 minutes into it, you're just utterly bored. This is terrible. And you have the choice to leave, but you can't get the money back because you paid for it already. Let's assume that the movie theater doesn't allow for refunds. Or you can sit the hour and a half remaining more of the movie because you already paid for it and you already spent the 30 minutes there. So that's a sunk cost. It's a cost you won't get back. But people tend to go through and finish the motion because it's cognitive dissonance to say that I'm going to give up this thing that I don't want to feel indebted to this thing that I paid for. Another great example is paying for a meal, and let's say you can't take it home, and instead of finishing the amount you should eat, you just overeat because you paid for it already. And classically comes from the idea that when you invested in, let's say, a stock in a company and the price went way down, just smarter to sell and move on. But then it's this identification with, I spent my money on this, so you feel invested egoically into the situation. So anyway, she talks about reframing your sunk costs, how our careers are not a race to the finish line, about how the linear trajectory in life model, right? School, job, promotion, retirement, die model is flawed and outdated, which I definitely agree with based on how much information, resources, and connections we have in today's age. Quote, there's no destination, there's only the journey. And she seems like a big part of her philosophy. She mentions this and this concept a lot about it's really the now and experiencing the moments as you move along your life, as opposed to having this pre-decided moment where you're going to end up in life. You're not really starting over. This sunk cost, or reframing the sunk cost, is you're not. She was able to import skills from medicine into her coaching work. We are not static beings. Past career decisions are a reflection of, quote, a reflection of who you were in the past, and they have helped make you who you are today. Chapter 10, she talks about how basically other people reacted, and she brings up, to summarize, that other people's reactions, the negative reactions to her, were really not about her. They were really about their perceptions. That their negative reactions to her decision were coming out of their fear and their status quo, feeling that they were being threatened and challenged. Their philosophy, what they expect in life, the German Weltanschauung of what the worldview is in life. And it's basically damaging to the ego when you see someone doing something that's counter to what your ego and your life is built on. But it didn't bother her because she was just so clear on who she was, and she realized only she lives her own life. Other people's approval didn't buy me happiness. Oh, I forgot to mention, all the bolded parts are subsections in her chapters. I should have mentioned that earlier, but okay. And then, people will judge you always. I think this is an awesome point here. So quote, people are going to criticize us anyways. So isn't it better to be criticized for doing something we genuinely love and believe in? Quote, it's normal to fear judgment and want to be accepted by others, but it's important to recognize when you are betraying yourself in order to fit in. Wow. I quoted this again because it's just so great. I believe the key to dealing with other people's reactions is to be firm and confident in your own decisions and your own choices. Be grounded in what is right for you. Know your values. Get clear on what you want for your life, what kind of person you want to be. Once you've clearly defined your visions and your expectations for yourself, other people's opinions won't matter much. The commentary I would say is this does take a lot of work, inner work, and personal development, because we just aren't taught this. And the longer we're in school and training, it's longer time for us not to learn these lessons. And this is why it's so important nowadays to have that coaching, mentorship, personal development, where you're really looking into your meaning and your soul to really identify what your meaning is for your life and your values and all of that. And that's my focus. What I work with is, finding that meaning, finding that soul, and finding that what is the meaning of you want to give your life. So I really resonate with this quote because I'm saying a lot about it. Chapter 11, she then talks about her inner journey with her thoughts about her loans as well as other people's thoughts. She got insight from help with a coach about that the loans don't have to be a big deal, and it's all about the mindset. And it's about finding the options of what to do about them, as opposed to letting them reign and dictate your mindset and thoughts. That being a doctor is absolutely not the only way to make a six-figure salary. Your loans don't have any power over you other than the power you give them. So again, all the bolded parts are subsections in the chapter. And chapter 12, how to move forward if you're feeling stuck. And she gives very, very wonderful tools here. So framing the situation, it's all okay. It's about giving yourself grace and compassion, accepting how you feel, and that figuring it out takes time. It took me years through residency and after to hone and polish and refine what exactly it's giving compassion to myself and I wanted to do. Should you stay or should you go? It's her motivation isn't to tell people to leave the situation. It's really about, is it correlate one's current situation with one perspectives of one's inner life. So she again mentions returning to your why and the why times 5 exercise, meaning you ask why, and then once you answer that, you ask why that, and then ask why again. And this helps assess whether the desires are your own or someone else's, she writes. And it's a difficult process, but really you just have to keep asking, and it's just very insightful. You get a lot of insights. And she gives this excellent exercise about connecting with your soul and how in situations that you can visualize, imagine, experience that's good for your soul will feel expansive, versus if it's a negative, not fitting situation, your soul will feel contracted. You can read her book for the full exercise. And shine a light on the fear is by asking yourself, what self-limiting stories are you telling yourself? And the fact is, we all have these stories. A lot of them are very similar because of upbringings, culture, things like that. But also, I believe things like the Enneagram, which I talked about before, tell us about patterns and archetypes of self-limiting stories. But we all have them. And then she has her 3 steps to move forward. This is a wonderful quote. You already know what to do when it comes to your career. You just don't know that you know. So knowing is very interesting. Coming back to the Enneagram model, for me, we have our head knowing, our heart knowing, and our body knowing, among other, without making it too more complicated. And part of you already knows, but part of you is also good at making up excuses, cognitive biases, defense mechanisms to prevent you from being aware of what you already know. Because that cognitive dissonance can be painful. So definitely makes sense that you already know what to do when it comes to your career. It's about perhaps feeling or fearing that you'll let yourself down, let others down. Again, what you talked about, the sunk cost and other people's expectations. So these are our 3 steps. Silence, where you connect with yourself. For example, sitting 15 minutes a day in silence without putting expectations. And she gives other alternative examples in her book. Step 2, self-reflection. She recommends journaling. That's what she's done, getting the thoughts out, and she gives very, very excellent prompts examples in her book. So check it out. And step 3, getting some help. She got coaching help as too in her journey. I myself have called the consult, gotten some help from coaches, and you can reach her and see how she helps as a coach at coachchausmd.com. You can also email her at hello@coachchausmd.com. You can also follow her on social media platforms, especially on Instagram, and get to see her wonderful stuff she does there and her dance moves too. So in conclusion, quote, there is no risk-free path in life. If you live your life confined to your comfort zone, you might be taking the biggest risk of all. You risk getting to the end of your life filled with regret for all the things you didn't do. Now, let's read that again. So there is no risk-free path in life. If you live your life confined to your comfort zone, you might be taking the biggest risk of all. You risk getting to the end of your life filled with regret for all the things you didn't do. She references Bon Ware's book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, which fittingly or ironically I bought last week. And I haven't started reading, but maybe this means I should read that and take notes and summarize and make a video for that. So this was my notes, summary, commentary on Chelsea Turgeon's Residency Dropout book. You can check it out on Amazon. I will put the link here so you can check it out. It's really good for the price. So definitely check it out. And there's great parts in it. I mean, can't quote all of it, otherwise I'm just putting our book here. That isn't the point. So check out the book. It's very quick read. I mean, it took me 3 hours to read it and write all of this, so it's probably take you less time. Maybe take you less time than that to read it. But anyway, check it out, and thank you for listening, and subscribe to see my other video summary, notes, commentary videos, and just because I like to read and learn and share things is what I do, as well as check out my work in as a physician search for meaning and soul coach as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.